Everyone, welcome to all those attending this roundtable on new EU regulation on Medtech, medical device and IVD. So welcome to all those in the room and virtually behind their screens. And I would like to thank our speakers and introduce our speakers. So I'm Alexandre Regnault, I'm VP at France Biotech, in charge of the Legal Commission and Clinical Trial Working Group, and a healthcare specialized lawyer as well. And so we are honored to have as speakers Stéphane Piat. Stéphane is CEO of Carmat. Carmat was founded in 2008 as a result of the collaboration between Professor Alain Carpentier, father of modern valvular heart surgery, and Jean-Luc Lagardère, chairman of Matra Défense of the Airbus Group. After more than 15 years of research, Carmat develops an implantable total artificial heart. Carmat's goal is to address a global public health need, the treatment of advanced heart failure, a severe and fatal disease constantly increasing in developing countries. And Carmat is aiming at getting CE mark approval under the MDD, we'll come to that, and planning to start an early feasibility study in USA in the coming months. Next, we have Marc Julien, CEO of Diabeloop. Diabeloop was created in 2015, and the company leverages artificial intelligence to automate and personalize diabetes management, and therefore unload the constant burden of people living with the disease. Its first automated insulin delivery system is CE marked already, and set to launch in Europe soon. We have also with us Lionel Dreux. Lionel is president of GMED, a 25-year-old French certification and notified body, and now a subsidiary of LNE, Laboratoire National de Métrologie et d'Essai. Lionel holds an engineering degree in electronics and a Master of Science in electromagnetism. Prior to joining GMED in 2018, Lionel spent 20 years with LNE, managing the testing direction, then the metrology direction, with a strong experience in electrical and mechanical testing applied to medical devices. He also has a 10 years experience of managing research in aeronautics at Airbus headquarters. And last but not least, we have with us on the video Gary Slack. Hope you're here with us, Gary. Gary, I'm sure you will appear on the screen in a few seconds. Gary is a Senior Vice President of Global Medical Devices, BSI. Here you go, we can see you. Hi, Gary. Gary has a considerable experience in the pharmaceutical industry for 13 years, then 14 years in the medical manufacturing industry, notably at Medtronic and Boston Scientific, and then joined BSI Group in 2008, so 12 years ago. So BSI Group is the largest EU notified body, for those who don't know, providing access to 1 in 3 devices reaching European patients. So thanks all for being here. I think the idea really in the 30 minutes that we have is to cross perspectives on these new, very demanding regulations. And so to have the perspective, of course, of 2 French originating healthcare innovative companies, as well as 2 notified bodies. So if I can start with you, Stéphane, to give us Carmat's perspective. As I briefly touched on in the introduction, Carmat will place the development from a regulatory point of view under the MDD, the 1993 Medical Device Directive. And so if we can hear a bit from you, on the constraints, of course, deriving from the new regulation, but also the strategy that you've developed at Carmat.
Yes, thank you for the invite. So, yeah, well, I will speak about mostly innovation because obviously CE mark is addressing products going from syringes to total artificial heart. So it's quite a hard task, to say. We've been experiencing this for the last 7 years. We picked up the DECRA as a notified body. We've been working very close. As you can imagine, the filing is super complex. We are using electronic boards used on missiles. We are using pumps used on helicopters. So it's very different from what people are used to deal with when they tackle a CE mark filing. So it's a lot of work, a lot of patience, a lot of partnership. And we are very happy with our notified body. They've been working very close, despite all the difficulties we could have. Now that said, we had to make a decision earlier this year when we learned about the postponing of the MDD directive. Because we were on the edge of filing our dossier, and we had to decide between MDD and MDR. And while we are preparing, obviously, for MDR, we were a bit puzzled and a bit worried about the change regarding the clinical module, because obviously there's been an add-up of a layer on the studies, and which is for us a concern, because when you work about innovation, it takes years, not to say decade, to understand the population, the target population of a disease, of a therapy. It takes time as well to prove that your therapy works well in a setting of patients with different type of solutions. And obviously we are concerned because we heard about this will to go deeper in the clinical studies. While it was one of the 14 modules, now it will become one of the most important modules. So I don't want to undermine the importance of the clinical studies when it comes to CE mark. But I think we should be aware of roles and responsibilities. While the CE mark aim at giving the possibility for a device to be used out of the clinical frame, and for me that's the only thing. It's just a get-up-ner. But the adoption of a product should not come from CE mark. You have scientific societies, and I think a deeper work has to come after you get CE mark. So our only concerns today on our partner, DECRA, was not able to give us a lot of details about the expert panel, which raised a lot of concerns at Carmat. So that's the reason why we decided to file under MD&D. My point of view is perfect is the enemy of good. And it's always very hard to find experts. You know, you go to everywhere you want to do a study, to pick up a PI, a clinical trialist is very difficult. How many failures you saw in so many clinical trials, randomized, double-blinded? How many failures did you see? Many, many. So for me, a clinical study is a snapshot at a certain point in time. So it's not the reality, just give you a trend. And my worry about the change in MDR is that we are trying to overdo, and we will ask people to do things that they won't be able to do properly, because they will have very hard time to get a real grasp about the therapy, the technology you want to propose in the future to patients. And the risk I foresee personally is that we will make things very difficult. And again, it's always about roles and responsibilities and objectives. And to me, the objective of the CE mark is really to give access out of a clinical frame to patient to a safe, or let's say, with minimal risk device. And I believe we should limit ourselves to safety and not really efficacy. Because as I said before, it takes decades to show the efficacy of a product when you want to do it well. And I have big doubts that we manage to do it with larger trial and more complex trial.
Thanks, Stéphane, because as we all know, MDR will be enter into full application May 21, and after having being delayed by 1 year in the COVID context. And it's true that this regulation does raise efficacy as well as safety requirements. So thanks for giving us this first reality check with Carmat's project. I will now hand over to Mark. Mark, can you tell us a bit more about, obviously, Debeloop's general perspective on this, but I would like maybe to hear you more particularly on constraints affecting specifically software and products with a very short life cycle.
Yeah, so hi, Marc Julien from Debeloop. So we have developed an artificial intelligence that is CE marked under the class 2B, and that takes therapeutic decision for the patient automatically without intervention of a doctor or the patient himself. So the way it works is that it captures the glucose level of the patient through a sensor, give that information to a handset which has the artificial intelligence on it, make the calculation of how much insulin the patient needs, and tell the pump automatically to deliver that amount of insulin every 5 minutes. So as you can see, during all that loop, at no point the patient or the doctor takes any decision. It's all automated. So as you can imagine, for a notified body and to get a CE mark, it was starting to be quite of a big problem and a big headache. So the way we tackle that is at the very beginning of Diabloop, in 2015, we hired probably the number 3 or number 4 employee, or the quality and regulatory person. And we started to first look at what notified body would understand what we were doing, because obviously nobody has ever done that in Europe. So we had to look at which notified body would be able to understand what we were doing, and second, would be happy to exchange with us from the very beginning from how we will get a CE marking with that, with that kind of technology. So in 2015, we contacted the TÜV Rheinland, and with that notified body, we exchanged on a very regular basis on what we were doing and how things were developed. And so through that process, and it took actually not that long, because Diabloop was incorporated in 2015, and in 2018, we managed to get our CE marking. And that was due to, the constant exchange we had with the notified body. And actually, we found that while discussing with the notified body, you can actually make things change and make them understand what you're doing, and so they can actually help you go through the system. Obviously, with the MD, the next the MDR coming on to us is a big nightmare, because the difficulty to apply for our kind of system is going to be even worse. Not mentioning the clinical trial, but we might actually be moving from 2B to 3, so it's going to be even worse, because any changes will become a nightmare. So we are discussing with our notified body whether we will have to move from 2B to 3. We hope not. And so we are actually, as Stefan has said, we are rushing up through new products upgrade through the current system, so that we can get everything done before May. And so we have a couple products that are under process currently. And that is, and we're also hoping that, we go through before the big nightmare. Now, that is to get the CE marking. But the problem we have, as you mentioned, is that we have a product that is evolving constantly, meaning that every 2 months, I have a new product on the shelf that has new module, that has new proven efficiency to the patient, because we've got models and we've got simulators in-house that can prove that, actually as well, probably better than actually a clinical trial. But if we want to, and if we discuss with the notified body, it will take a year to get the approval for the next update of our CE marking. And so the big question and the big challenge, I think, for our industry, not just us, but the whole medtech industry, is that more and more software will be part of the system, and the design of the CE marking and all the regulations has been done for products that are defined and fixed in sort of nature and settings, and not something that is constantly evolving. And my question to those notified body and to the European Commission is, how are we going to tackle that issue, and how that is going to be processed in the coming future?
Thanks, Mark. It's good that you end with a question to notified bodies, because our 2 next speakers are representative of notified bodies. So, Lionel, you represent the so far one notified body based in France, not to mean, of course, that you don't work everywhere in Europe, but you might have a word to tell us from this perspective too. But maybe, having heard Stefan and Mark, what do you think would be your main points of attention, for companies to get prepared, especially, or at least including, regarding the transition between the former and the new regulation, maybe?
Thank you, Alexandre. Good afternoon, everybody. There are a lot of things to do for the companies today. We know that they are focused also on the directive, because due to this delay of 1 year for the application of the regulation, but it's important to have an established strategy to get into MDR. And it's important to present and to exchange with a notified body on this strategy. It's necessary to anticipate as much as possible and to apply for certification under MDR as soon as possible, because the process of certification is longer than the process of the directive. You have different steps. The notified body has new jobs to do during this process, and it's important to have this in mind and to anticipate as soon as possible this application, because there is a delay on the application of the MDR, but there is no delay on the end of the grace period. And it's important to know that we should have a bottleneck at the end of this grace period if it will not change in the future.
Can you remind us of the grace period?
Yes, 3 years after the beginning, after May 2021, so May 2024. It's very, very short, because it's necessary to recertificate all of the medical devices on the market. And so it's a very hard job for everybody, for the companies and for the notified body. And so if this grace period don't move, we have to check that and we could face this on a bottleneck at the end of the process. And so it's important to discuss, as it is mentioned, it's important to exchange with the notified body on the strategy, on the product. We have to manage also the modification of the products. If you maintain a product with a directive certificate during the grace period, you can maintain it without any substantive modification. And we know that in the industry, there faces to a lot of modification. Some modification that they decide, and some modification that they don't decide. And so it's important to have also this in mind, because you could face this to a certificate which should not be maintained in the future due to modification and substantive modification. So it's important to discuss, to exchange on the strategy, and to prepare the regulation, and the time is very, very short.
Thanks, Lionel. And maybe on another yet related subject, on the number of notified bodies that has reached the step under the new regulations. We know that there were maybe 60 or 70, there used to be, probably a bit fewer now, but maybe one more in France. Do you have a perspective on that landscape, regarding notified body that, of course, could be useful to the companies to know?
Yes. And under directive, we have almost 40 notified body, or 42, 43. In the MDR today, we are 17 designated under MDR, and there are only 4 notified body under IVDR. So we apply and we work on our certification also and designation on IVDR. We think that we should be between 20 and 25 in May 2021. So it's less...
a lot fewer than there used to be.
Yes. And we also faces on a demonstration of competency and capacity, because we have to demonstrate our competency and capacity on all of the codes. There are a lot of codes which for each regulation. And so we should face this on bottlenecks on some specific codes for some specific products, because some notified body hasn't the complete scope of designation. So there is a number of notified body which is important, but also the scope of each notified body. And we know that today we should have bottlenecks on some specific codes for some specific medical devices. And so it's a very big challenge also.
So fewer notified bodies, not everyone will do everything, so it's also, of course, for the company, again, one more reason to engage in dialogue very early.
Yes, and there is places for other notified bodies, so for a second notified body in France,
I think there will be enough work for everyone. And actually turning to Gary from BSI, if we can see you, hopefully. Gary, You also represent, of course, a notified body with another history. Here you go. Based in the UK. So again, I guess my questions would be similar than those to Lionel in the sense of what would be your takeaway points or points of attention for the industry, but also you may want to touch on IVDR, which we very, very briefly touched on, which has its own timeline, of course, because we have a lot of companies active in diagnostic today. And if we have a second, I would be interested in hearing from you about Brexit, although that's a very complicated subject in itself. So over to you, Gary.
Okay, well, I mean, to answer your first question, I would probably, sorry, there's a lot of feedback on the sound. I would probably reinforce the most important things, which are, I think, already mentioned by Mark. One is have an early and constant dialogue with your notified body if you're applying for the MDOT from a very early stage, even to the point where I think, Mark, you mentioned the expert group and the MDCG. That is very much the remit of the MDCG now. It's made clear that notified bodies cannot do a lot of preclinical work. But what you can do, for example, is invite your notified body into that MDCG meeting at the front end. I think the earlier the notified body gets a view of your plans, the more likely you are to have a more successful outcome from your submission. So first, I would say early. I think also, as well as communicating, I think do not leave it too late. We saw last year when the original date of application was due this year in May 2020, a significant compression of the amount of volume of conformity assessments that needed to be completed. And I think GMED also made the point, the final date of 2024 is not moved. So even though the date of application has been moved a year, we still have the same number of devices to get through by 2024. So go early, talk early would be my two key things, I would say. One thing I thought I might share with you, which might be useful, because we were the first notified body designated under the MDR, and I think the second one under the IVDR, and we've now got 18 months under our belt in terms of designation with the MDR. So we have several hundred applications in process at the moment. So I thought it might be useful just to give you a quick insight to the areas that we're seeing that are problematic so far with the MDR. If I look at the QMS audit aspects at the moment, the things we're seeing that are problematic where manufacturers are getting into issues, I would say it's around internal audit, where they have either failed to undertake an internal audit or to record the details of that internal audit in their records. There are issues with economic operators. We're seeing insufficient contractual agreements between economic operators and distributors, and that's another area. Absence of post-market surveillance plans have also been picked up in our QMS audits. Either no plan at all, or the plans have been inadequate, or, for example, the PSUR, the Periodic Safety Update Report, plans have not been defined within the processes. So those are the four key areas we're finding so far, and that's a relatively small sample. It's a few hundred. You know, we're not up to thousands yet, but it'll give you some idea of where we're finding issues. If I then move on to conformity assessment, I would say the single biggest area we're seeing problems, and this is not going to surprise Stefan or Mark, is in the clinical evaluation area. The importance of the clinical evaluation assessment report now in the initial submission is very significant. And I would say, if nothing else, pay significant attention to that. Make sure you understand the general safety and performance requirements when the CAR, make sure it's well completed before you submit. And one thing we've started to do as a consequence of that is, because we're very concerned that we'll get submissions from manufacturers and then look at them several weeks or even a few months later and find there are significant omissions in that initial submission. So we're doing a completeness check at the front end to make sure that the majority of what we need is in there, so that when we do come to pick up that file several weeks or a couple of months later, we have got a better idea of what's there. And I think the other reason for doing that is you'll all be fully aware that the Commission now has put significant constraints on notified bodies, either in terms of time and or the number of rounds of questions that you can ask, which, if you fail to meet those criteria, could lead to a refusal. So again, it's all about communication, starting early and making sure that things are complete at the front end. Those would be my key tips around the MDR at this stage. A lot of other things. I would say the other area that we're probably seeing a lot of issues is in validation and verification of some of the processes as well. Again, often not well documented. I think often it's there, but it's not necessarily been well documented, and there are significant requirements under the MDR. I think the other contrast I would say with the MDR is much more prescriptive, much more black and white, and the ability to interpret the greyness, for want of a better term, that was there in the MDD is less prevalent under the MDR. So again, all this comes back to talking early to a notified body and being well organized, I think.
Gary,
Do you want me to?
I think, unfortunately, we'll come to the conclusion. But thanks for the specific points of advice and very interesting hindsight from BSI's 18 months of being designated already. I would like to hand over to each of you just for one very short conclusion, having heard, all the speakers. So maybe Stéphane, if you have one either takeaway points maybe or reaction to what has been said for the audience.
Yeah, as I said previously, perfect is the enemy of good, and I truly believe, as Gary said, that it will be a big break for innovation, and it's not what we want to see. So hopefully, going ahead, we're able to partner a bit better with the European community to have a bit more flexibility about interpreting the grayness, as Gary said, because life is not black and white.
Let's work on that. Mark.
Well, as I said, get prepared as soon as possible. Invest in actually time and money and people, because it's going to be a journey, and you need to get organized very early on. And in terms of perspective, my two main concern is, as I said, the evolution. How this regulation is going to be able to tackle products that are evolving on a very rapid basis. And the other one, of course, is what about artificial intelligence? How is artificial intelligence is going to be regulated in the future? And this is this is to me a very big concern, not just for Diabloop, but for the whole Europe
for
itself.
Innovation.
Yeah, exactly.
Very big issue of concern. Thanks, Mark. Lionel, word of conclusion from you.
In few words, share your transition period strategy with the notified body. Discuss, exchange with the notified body. It's necessary because the transition period is very, very short.
Okay. Thank you very much. And Gary, maybe in terms of very short conclusion, should we be afraid of 31st of December and Brexit? Will everything crumble down, or should we not worry that much from your perspective, of course?
Okay, I'll give you a professional one rather than the personal one, okay? I think the thing from a medical device perspective you should think about with Brexit is that I think we've proofed our manufacturers against Brexit that are working with BSI, for example, because we moved 98% of them to a notified body in the Netherlands. So, from a CE perspective, I think things are relatively as we've discussed. One thing to be aware of, obviously, is the UK has a new system as of the 1st of January next year, the UK CA mark. Just a couple in 1 minute things that are critical on that. Both MDR and MDD, so directive and regulatory certificates, will be valid until the 30th of June 2023. So there is some leeway there. The thing you do need to know, two things very quickly though, if you want to still access the UK market, would be you need to have a responsible person in the UK from the 1st of January, so they need to be registered. And the second thing is that you need to register the products, and those product registrations are either 4 months for a 2B implantable or a class 3 device, 8 months for a 2A or 2B device, and 12 months for a class 1 device. Those are probably the three key things I would leave you with from a Brexit perspective.
Thanks also for this very specific and practical advice. So I would like to thank again our 4 speakers. I hope you enjoyed the roundtable. A lot of challenges ahead of us, and enjoy the rest of Health Tech Innovation Day for the rest of 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Merci, au revoir.